Welcome back, young Camelmorians, to The Princess and the Goblin. We left off on Chapter 6, titled The Little Miner. I hope you've been pondering on who that little miner could be. Rolfe, do you have any more guesses before we start? Oh! And before you say anything, it's not a dragon.
Oh! Well, in that case, no idea. Please go on.
All right, well, thanks for nothing, Rolfe. Here we go. Chapter 6, The Little Miner. The next day, the great cloud still hung over the mountain, and the rain poured like water from a full sponge. The princess was very fond of being out of doors, and she nearly cried when she saw that the weather was no better. But the mist was not of such a dark, dingy grey. There was light in it, and as the hours went on, it grew brighter and brighter until it was almost too brilliant to look at. And late in the afternoon, the sun broke out so gloriously that Irene clapped her hands, crying,
See, Looty? The sun has had his face washed. Look how bright he is. Do get my hat and let us go for a walk. Oh dear, how happy I am.
Looty was very glad to please the princess. She got her hat and cloak, and they set out together for a walk up the mountain. For the road was so hard and steep that the water could not rest upon it, and it was always dry enough for walking a few minutes after the rain ceased. The clouds were rolling away in broken pieces, like great over-woolly sheep, whose wool the sun had bleached till it was almost too white for the eyes to bear. Between them, the sky shone with a deeper and purer blue because of the rain. The trees on the roadside were hung all over with drops, which sparkled in the sun like jewels. The only things that were no brighter for the rain were the brooks that ran down the mountain. They had changed from the clearness of crystal to a muddy brown, but what they lost in color, they gained in sound, or at least in noise, for a brook, when it is swollen, is not so musical as before. But Irene was in raptures with the great brown streams tumbling down everywhere, and Looty shared in her delight, for she too had been confined in the house for 3 days. At length she observed that the sun was getting low, and said it was time to be going back. She made the remark again and again, but every time the princess begged her to go on just a little farther and a little farther, reminding her that it was much easier to go downhill, and saying that when they did turn, they would be at home in a moment. So on and on they did go, now to look at a group of ferns over whose tops a stream was pouring in a watery arc, now to pick a shining stone from a rock by the wayside, now to watch the flight of some bird. Suddenly, the shadow of a great mountain peak came up from behind and shot in front of them. When the nurse saw it, she started and shook, and tremulously grasping the hand of the princess, turned and began to run down the hill.
What's all the haste, Nursey?
Asked Irene, running alongside of her.
We must not be out a moment longer.
But we can't help being out a good many moments longer.
It was true. The nurse almost cried. They were much too far from home. It was against express orders to be out with the princess 1 moment after the sun was down, and they were nearly a mile up the mountain. If His Majesty, Irene's papa, were to hear of it, Looty would certainly be dismissed. That means fired, or let go from her job. And to leave the princess would break her heart. It was no wonder that she ran. But Irene was not in the least frightened, not knowing anything to be frightened at. She kept on chattering as well as she could, but it was not easy.
Looty, why do you run so fast? It shakes my teeth when I talk.
Then don't talk,
said Looty. But the princess went on talking. She was always saying,
Look, Looty.
But Looty paid no more heed to anything she said, only ran on.
Look, Looty, don't you see that funny man peeping over the rock?
Looty only ran the faster. They had to pass the rock, and when they came nearer, the princess clearly saw that it was only a large fragment of the rock itself that she had mistaken for a man.
Look, Looty, there's such a curious creature at the foot of that old tree. Look at it, Looty, it's making faces at us, I do think.
Looty gave a stifled cry and ran faster still, so fast that Irene's little legs could not keep up with her, and she fell with a clash. It was a hard downhill road, and she had been running very fast, so it was no wonder she began to cry. This put the nurse nearly beside herself, but all she could do was run on the moment she got the princess on her feet again.
Who's that laughing at me?
Said the princess, trying to keep in her sobs and running too fast for her grazed knees.
Nobody, child,
said the nurse almost angrily. But that instant there came a burst of coarse tittering from somewhere near, and a hoarse, distinct voice that seemed to say, "Lies, lies, lies!" cried the nurse with a sigh that was almost a scream, and ran on faster than ever.
Nursey, Looty, I can't run anymore. Do let us walk a bit.
What am I to do?
Said the nurse.
Here, I will carry you.
She caught her up, but found her much too heavy to run with, and had to set her down again. Then she looked wildly about her, gave a great cry, and said,
"We've taken the wrong turning somewhere, and I don't know where we are. We are lost, lost!"
The terror she was in had quite bewildered her. It was true enough, they had lost the way. They had been running down into a little valley in which there was no house to be seen. Now Irene did not know what good reason there was for her nurse's terror, for the servants had all strict orders never to mention the goblins to her, but it was very discomposing to see her nurse in such a fright. Before, however, she had time to grow thoroughly alarmed like her, she heard the sound of whistling, and that revived her. Presently, she saw a boy coming up the road from the valley to meet them. He was the whistler. But before they met, his whistling changed to singing, and this is something like what he sang.
Ring, dod, bang, go the hammers clang, hit and turn and bore, whiz and puff and roar. Thus we rive the rocks and force the goblin locks, say the shining ore. 1, 2, 3, bright as gold can be. 4, 5, 6, shovels, matics, picks. 7, 8, 9, light your lamp at mine. 10, 11, 12, loosely hold the helve. Oh, where the merry minor boys make the goblins hold their noise.
I wish you would hold your noise,
said the nurse rudely, for the very word goblin at such a time and in such a place made her tremble. It would bring the goblins upon them to a certainty, she thought, to defy them in that way. But whether the boy heard her or not, he did not stop his singing.
13, 14, 15, this is worth the sifting. 16, 17, 18, there's the match and late 10, 19, 20. Goblins in a plenty. Oh,
"Don't be quiet!" cried the nurse in a whispered shriek. But the boy, who was now close at hand, still went on.
Hush, scush, scurry, there you go in a hurry. Gobble, gobble, gobbling, there you go a-wobbling. Hobble, hobble, hobbling, cobble, cobble, cobbling. Oh, bob, gobbling. There,
said the boy, as he stood still opposite them.
That'll do for them. They can't bear singing, and they can't stand that song. They can't sing themselves, for they have no more voice than a crow. They don't like other people to sing.
The boy was dressed in a miner's dress, with a curious cap on his head. There we go, there's the little miner. He was a very nice-looking boy, with eyes as dark as the mines in which he worked, and as sparkling as the crystals in their rocks. He was about 12 years old. His face was almost too pale for beauty, which came of his being so little in the open air and the sunlight, for even vegetables grown in the dark are white. But he looked happy, merry indeed, perhaps at the thought of having routed the goblins, and his bearing as he stood before them had nothing clownish or rude about it.
I saw 'em,
he went on,
as I came up, and I'm very glad I did. I knew they were after somebody, but I couldn't say who it was. They won't touch you so long as I'm with you.
Why, who are you?
asked the nurse, offended at the freedom with which he spoke to them.
I'm Peter's son.
Who's Peter?
Peter the miner.
I don't know him.
Well, I'm his son, though.
And why would the goblins mind you, pray?
Well, because I don't mind them. I'm used to them.
What difference does that make?
If you're not afraid of them, they're afraid of you. I'm not afraid of them, that's all. But it's all that's wanted. Up here, that is. It's a different thing down there. They won't always mind that song, even down there. And if anyone sings it, they stand grinning at him awfully. And if he gets frightened and misses a word or says a wrong one, don't they give it him.
Whoa, what do they do to him?
asked Irene with a trembling voice.
Don't go frightening the princess,
said the nurse.
The princess?
repeated the little miner, taking off his curious cap.
I beg your pardon, but you oughtn't to be out so late. Everybody knows that's against the law.
Yes, indeed it is,
said the nurse, beginning to cry again.
and I shall have to suffer for it.
What does that matter?
Said the boy.
It must be your fault. It is the princess who will suffer for it. I hope they didn't hear you call her the princess. If they did, they're sure to know her again. They're awfully sharp.
Oh, Looty,
cried the princess.
take me home.
Don't go on like that.
Said the nurse to the boy, almost fiercely.
How could I help it? I lost my way.
You shouldn't have been out so late. You wouldn't have lost your way if you hadn't been frightened.
Said the boy.
Come along, I'll soon set you right again. Shall I carry your little highness?
Impertinence,
murmured the nurse, but she did not say it aloud, for she thought if she made him angry, he might take his revenge by telling someone belonging to the house, and then it would be sure to come to the king's ears.
No, thank you,
said Irene.
I can walk very well, though I can't run so fast as Nursey. If you will give me one hand, Looty will give me another, and then I shall get on famously.
They soon had her between them, holding a hand of each.
Now let's run,
said the nurse.
No,
Said the little miner.
that's the worst thing you can do. If you hadn't run before, you would not have lost your way. And if you run now, they will be after you in a moment.
I don't want to run.
Said Irene.
You don't think of me.
Said the nurse.
Yes, I do, Looty. The boy says they won't touch us if we don't run.
Yes, but if they know at the house that I've kept you out so late, I shall be turned away, and that would break my heart.
Turned away, Looty? Who would turn you away?
Your papa, child.
But I'll tell him it was all my fault, and you know it was, Looty.
Oh, he won't mind that. I'm sure he won't.
Then I'll cry and go down on my knees to him and beg him not to take away my own dear Looty.
The nurse was comforted at hearing this, and said no more. They went on, walking pretty fast, but taking care not to run a step.
I want to talk to you,
Said Irene to the little miner.
but it's so awkward. I don't know your name.
My name's Curdie, little princess.
What a funny name. Curdie, what more?
Curdie Peterson. What's your name, please?
Irene?
What more?
I don't know what more. What more is my name, Looty?
Princesses haven't got more than one name. They don't want it.
Oh, then, Curdie, you must call me just Irene and no more.
No, indeed.
Said the nurse indignantly.
He shall do no such thing.
Well, what shall he call me then, Looty?
Your Royal Highness.
My Royal Highness? What's that? No, Looty, I will not be called names. I don't like them. You said to me once yourself that it's only rude children that call names, and I'm sure Curdie wouldn't be rude. Curdie, my name's Irene.
Well, Irene.
Said Curdie, with a glance at the nurse, which showed that he enjoyed teasing her.
It's very kind of you to let me call you anything. I like your name very much.
He expected the nurse to interfere again, but he soon saw that she was too frightened to speak. She was staring at something a few yards before them, in the middle of the path, where it narrowed between rocks so that only one could pass at a time.
It's very much kinder of you to go out of your way to take us home,
Said Irene.
Oh, I'm not going out of my way yet.
Said Curdie.
It's on the other side of those rocks the path turns off to me father's.
You wouldn't think of leaving us until we're safe home, I'm sure.
Gasped the nurse.
Of course not.
Said Curdie.
You dear, good, kind Curdie. I'll give you a kiss when we get home.
Said the princess. The nurse gave her a great pull by the hand she held, but at that instant the something in the middle of the way, which had looked like a great lump of earth brought down by the rain, began to move. One after another, it shot out 4 long things, like 2 arms and 2 legs, but it was now too dark to tell what they were. The nurse began to tremble from head to foot. Irene clasped Curdie's hand yet faster, and Curdie began to sing again.
1, 2, hitting you. 3, 4, blasting bore. 5, 6, there's a fix. 7, 8, hold it straight. 9, 10, hit again. Hurry, scurry, bother, smother. There's a toad in the road. Smash it, squash it, fry it, dry it. You're another up and off. That's enough. Ah!
As he uttered the last words, Curdie let go his hold of his companion and rushed at the thing in the road as if he would trample it under his feet. It gave a great spring and ran straight up one of the rocks like a huge spider. Gertie turned back laughing and took Irene's hand again. She grasped his very tight, but said nothing till they had passed the rocks. A few yards more, and she found herself on a part of the road she knew, and was able to speak again.
Do you know, Gertie, I don't quite like your song. It sounds to me rather rude,
she said.
Well, perhaps it is,
Answered Gertie.
I never thought of that. It's the way we have. We do it because they don't like it.
Who don't like it?
The cobs, as we call them.
Don't,
Said the nurse.
Why not?
Said Gertie.
I beg you won't. Please don't.
Oh, if you ask me that way, of course I won't, though I don't know a bit why. Look, there are the lights of your great house down below. You'll be at home in 5 minutes now.
Nothing more happened. They reached home in safety. Nobody had missed them, or even known they had gone out. And they arrived at the door belonging to their part of the house without anybody seeing them. The nurse was rushing in with a hurried and not over-gracious good night to Gertie, but the princess pulled her hand from hers and was just throwing her arms around Gertie's neck when she caught her again and dragged her away.
Ludi, I promised Gertie a kiss,
Cried Irene.
A princess mustn't give kisses. It's not at all proper,
Said Ludi.
but I promised.
Said the princess.
There's no occasion. He's only a minor boy.
He is a good boy and a brave boy, and he's been very kind to us. Ludi, I promised.
Then you shouldn't have promised.
Ludi, I promised him a kiss.
Your Royal Highness
Said Ludi, suddenly growing very respectful.
must come in directly.
Nurse, a princess must not break her word.
Said Irene, drawing herself up and standing stock still. Stock still is a weird word, but it essentially just means standing straight up. Ludi did not know which the king might count the worst, to let the princess be out after sunset, or to let her kiss a minor boy. She did not know that, being a gentleman, as many kings have been, he would have counted neither of them the worse. However much he might have disliked his daughter to kiss the minor boy, he would not have had her break her word for all the goblins in creation. But, as I say, the nurse was not lady enough to understand this, and so she was in a great difficulty, for, if she insisted, someone might hear the princess cry and run to see, and then all would come out. But here Gertie came again to the rescue.
Never mind, Princess Irene.
He said,
You mustn't kiss me tonight, but if you shan't break your word, I will come another time. You may be sure I will.
Oh, thank you, Gertie.
said the princess, and stopped crying.
Good night, Irene. Good night, Ludi.
Said Gertie, and turned and was out of sight in a moment.
I should like to see him.
Muttered the nurse, as she carried the princess to the nursery.
Oh, you will see him. You may be sure Gertie will keep his word. He's sure to come again.
Said Irene,
I should like to see him.
repeated the nurse, and said no more. She did not want to open a new cause of strife with the princess by saying more plainly what she meant. Glad enough that she had succeeded both in getting home unseen and in keeping the princess from kissing the miner's boy, she resolved to watch her far better in future. Her carelessness had already doubled the danger she was in. Formerly, the goblins were her only fear. Now she had to protect her charge from Gertie as well. And that is Chapter 6.
Well done, Rolfie, on staying awake that whole chapter. I know it was quite a long one.
Yes, but it was quite interesting. I couldn't fall asleep if I tried.
That's good to hear, Rolfie. Well, if you were paying attention so well, why don't you tell us what happened?
Absolutely, Lord Petty. Well, first, it was raining outside like it seems to always do in the kingdom, and it stopped raining just enough so that the Princess Irene and Ludi could go out on a walk.
But what happened on the walk?
The nursery got Irene lost.
Yes, it got a little scary there for a minute, didn't it?
Yeah, Irene kept saying all these scary things, but then they heard some laughing which made me tremble.
Right, hang on, calm down, Rolfie. It's all right. But what did they hear after the laughing? It wasn't scary, remember? What was it?
It was whistling.
Yes, and who was whistling?
It was the little minor boy.
And that was the miner, wasn't it? Not a dragon.
No, not a dragon.
And what did the miner boy say his name was?
Curdy. Sounds like a type of cereal. Kid, have your curdies.
Indeed it does, Rolfie. I hadn't thought about that. Well, what did Gertie teach them?
Oh, he knew that the goblins didn't like it when you sang, but you had to make sure that you sang all the words properly, or else the goblins would know and they'd get you.
That is right, Rolfe. Now, this piece of information about goblins not liking singing is something we should keep in mind. I have a feeling it might come into play a little bit later.
Like foreshadowing?
Well, kind of. It's more like a setup. It's a piece of information that we now know that will later become important. Now, Rolfe, what did the nurse think of the little miner boy, Curdy?
Oh, I don't think the nurse trusted him. He seemed a little too comfortable around the goblins.
Yes, you are right, Rolfe.
And then Curdy took them all the way home.
All right, I think that's enough plot summary for tonight. We shall now move on to the next chapter. It's much shorter than this last one, don't worry. Let's get through this one, and then we shall call it a night. Chapter 7, titled The Mines. Curdy went home whistling. He resolved to say nothing about the princess for fear of getting the nurse into trouble, for while he enjoyed teasing her because of her absurdity, he was careful not to do her any harm. He saw no more of the goblins and was soon fast asleep in his bed. He woke in the middle of the night and thought he heard curious noises outside. He sat up and listened, then got up, and opening the door very quietly, he went out. When he peeped round the corner, he saw, under his window, a group of stumpy creatures, whom he at once recognized by their shape. Hardly, however, had he begun his 1, 2, 3, when they broke asunder, scurried away, and were out of sight. He returned laughing, got into bed again, and was fast asleep in a moment. Reflecting a little over the matter in the morning, he came to the conclusion that, as nothing of the kind has ever happened before, they must be annoyed with him for interfering to protect the princess. By the time he was dressed, however, he was thinking of something quite different, for he did not value the enmity of the goblins in the least. As soon as they had had breakfast, he set off with his father for the mine. They entered the hill by a natural opening under a huge rock where a little stream rushed out. They followed its course for a few yards when the passage took a turn and sloped steeply into the heart of the hill, with many angles and windings and branchings off, and sometimes with steps where it came upon a natural gulf. It led them deep into the hill before they arrived at the place where they were at present digging out the precious ore. This was of various kinds, for the mountain was very rich with the better sorts of metals. With flint and steel and tinderbox, they lighted their lamps, then fixed them on their heads, and were soon hard at work with their pickaxes and shovels and hammers. Father and son were at work near each other, but not in the same gang. The passages out of which the ore was dug, they called gangs. For when the lode, or a vein of ore, was small, one miner would have to dig away alone in a passage no bigger than gave him just room to work, sometimes in uncomfortable, cramped positions. If they stopped for a moment, they could hear everywhere around them, some nearer, some farther off, the sounds of their companions burrowing away in all directions in the inside of the great mountain, some boring holes in the rock in order to blow it up with gunpowder, others shoveling the broken ore into baskets to be carried to the mouth of the mine, others hitting away with their pickaxes. Sometimes, if the miner was in a very lonely part, he would hear only a tap-tapping, no louder than that of a woodpecker, for the sound would come from a great distance off through the solid mountain rock. The work was hard at best, for it was very warm underground, but it was not particularly unpleasant, and some of the miners, when they wanted to earn a little more money for a particular purpose, would stop behind the rest and work all night. But you could not tell night from day down there, except from feeling tired and sleepy, for no light of the sun ever came into those gloomy regions. Some who had thus remained behind during the night, although certain there were none of their companions at work, would declare the next morning that they heard, every time they halted for a moment to take breath, a tap-tapping all about them, as if the mountain were then more full of miners than ever it was during the day. And some, in consequence, would never stay overnight, for all knew those were the sounds of the goblins. They worked only at night, for the miners' night was the goblins' day. Indeed, the greater number of the miners were afraid of the goblins, for there were strange stories well known amongst them of the treatment some had received whom the goblins had surprised at their work during the night. The more courageous of them, however, amongst them Peter Peterson and Curdie, who in this took after his father, had stayed in the mine all night again, and although they had several times encountered a few stray goblins, had never yet failed in driving them away. As I have indicated already, the chief defense against them was verse, for they had hated verse of every kind. Verse is just another way to say songs, and some kinds they could not endure at all. I suspect they could not make any themselves, and that was why they disliked it so much. At all events, those who were most afraid of them were those who could neither make verses themselves, nor remember the verses that other people made for them. While those who were never afraid were those who could make verses for themselves, for although there were certain old rhymes which were very effectual, yet it was well known that a new rhyme, if of the right sort, was even more distasteful to them, and therefore more effectual in putting them to flight, meaning making them run away. Perhaps my readers may be wondering what the goblins could be about, working all night long, seeing they never carried up the ore and sold it, but when I have informed them concerning what Curdie learned the very next night, they will be able to understand. That's you. For Curdie had determined, if his father would permit him, to remain there alone this night, and that for 2 reasons. First, he wanted to get extra wages in order that he might buy a very warm red petticoat for his mother, who had begun to complain of the cold of the mountain air sooner than usual this autumn. What a nice son. And second, he had just a faint glimmering of hope of finding out what the goblins were about under his window the night before. When he told his father, he made no objection, for he had great confidence in his boy's courage and resources.
"I'm sorry I can't stay with you,"
said Peter.
"but I want to go and pay the parson a visit this evening. And besides, I've had a bit of a headache all day."
I'm sorry for that, Father,
said Curdie.
"Oh, it's not much. You'll be able to take care of yourself, won't you?"
Yes, Father, I will. I'll keep a sharp lookout, I promise you.
Curdie was the only one who remained in the mine. About 6 o'clock, the rest went away, everyone bidding him good night and telling him to take care of himself, for he was a great favorite with them all.
Don't forget your rhymes,
said one. No, answered Curdie.
It's no matter if he does,
said another.
For he'll only have to make a new one.
"Yes, but he mightn't be able to make it fast enough,"
said another.
"And while it was cooking in his head, they might take a main advantage and set upon him."
I'll do my best,
said Curdie.
I'm not afraid.
"We all know that,"
they returned, and left him. And there's chapter 7. Pretty short, but we did learn that Curdie is well known amongst all the miners to be one of the few miners who's not afraid of the goblins in the least, because why, Rolfie?
I know this one.
Come on, you can do it, Rolfie. I believe in you.
Oh, because he can sing and make songs.
Yes, there you go, Rolfie. Way to go. All right, we're going to go ahead and cut it off there tonight. Thank you all, young Camelmorians, for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Rolfie and I will miss you until you see us next time. Excuse me, until you hear us next time.
Good night, little ones.
Good night, young peasants. Sleep well.
Sleepies. Sleep, sleep.